This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanna.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have a great show today. There's a lot going on. Obviously, there's a crisis in Sudan right now, which we won't have time to get to, but eventually we'll be sorting through all those issues. And there is a lot going on in Palestine right now. We have breaking news. Unfortunately, a Palestinian activist and leader, Huwaida Arraf, has died on his 86th day of a hunger strike in an Israeli prison. It's unprecedented, the lack of medical attention that he's received. He's gone on multiple hunger strikes. Essentially, the Israeli military and prison system let this man die from a hunger strike, and we're going to be talking about that. Currently, there's about 5,000 Palestinians who are in jail right now, men, women, and children, 1,900 of which are in administrative detention, men, women, and children. These are catastrophic conditions for Palestinians, and Huwaida Arraf it's devastating that they let him die this way. We're also going to be talking about U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy, at a time when the entire world is shunning Benjamin Netanyahu and the apartheid state. You have Kevin McCarthy going to Benjamin Netanyahu and basically celebrating the 75th birthday of the apartheid state. We're going to be talking a little bit about that. But before we do all that, Jamal, we're going to be watching a really amazing interview you did with Huwaida Arraf. She's facing a smear campaign by the Jewish Community Relations Council and the American Jewish community, who are decrying her, again, because of her First Amendment right to be critical of the apartheid state. They're saying that she has anti-Israel rhetoric. She was speaking in Detroit at Bloomfield Hills High School in a day-long event on equity and diversity, and she spoke about her experience confronting these issues, and it's a really important interview that we'll listen to Huwaida and you talk.
Yeah, we'll listen to Huwaida, Jess, but here is something. This is, of course, your home state and your old neighborhood, Detroit. But think about it. You're supposed, as a Palestinian-American, to speak about your experience as a Palestinian-American or as a Palestinian, your parents, your immigration, without mentioning a Nakba,
apartheid,
without mentioning an occupation, without mentioning an apartheid. Think about it. Just for our listeners here to think about that. So anyway, let's watch this very important interview. In mid-March, when Huwaida Arraf was invited to be part of a panel at Detroit's Bloomfield Hills High School's day-long event on equity and diversity, she spoke to her experience growing up as a Palestinian-American. She included the time she lived in Palestine, helping to organize peaceful actions of resistance against Israel's expanding oppression and occupation of Palestinian land and lives. Within 24 hours, a smear campaign was launched against Arraf by both the Jewish Community Relations Council and the American Jewish Committee, decrying her so-called anti-Israel rhetoric. This criticism was taken up and conflated with antisemitism by the local Reform Temple Israel. Although not present at the event, school superintendent Pat Watson supported their grievance and suspended the school principal. No specifics were given to support the accusations. Joining us on Arab Talk this week is Huwaida Arraf. She is a Palestinian-American civil rights lawyer and activist. In 2022, she ran for election to the U.S. House to represent Michigan's 10th Congressional District. Huwaida, welcome again to Arab Talk.
Thank you for having me, Jamal. Always good to be with you.
So talk about this student-organized assembly. What was the focus and what perspective did you offer?
Sure. First of all, I think the initiative is a wonderful one. It was started by students following a string of racist incidents at the local high school a couple of years ago in the fall of 2021. And so a group of students got together and planned an assembly trying to expose students to different views in an attempt to increase awareness about the harmful effects of racism, and of course to, in the goal of seeking more understanding and acceptance of diversity. So this was the second year of the assembly. Again, it was student organized, student run. And I was asked if I would speak about my experiences growing up with racism and discrimination. I told the students that I didn't have very many stories about my high school days, but I could speak in more detail about my experience confronting racism and discrimination in my work campaigning for Palestinian rights. And they said that would be perfect. And the event was planned. I was one of 5 speakers. There was me, 2 African Americans, 1 Asian American, and 1 transgender person. And we each spoke for 7 minutes in 4 assemblies, 1 for each grade of the high school, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And I spoke about why my parents came to this country. My mom was actually almost 9 months pregnant with me when my parents left Palestine. And they left because they wanted their kids to have freedom and opportunity, things that aren't available to Palestinians living under Israeli military occupation. And I was lucky to have a privileged childhood, to not face soldiers on a daily basis going to school. I told them a little bit about my growing up. And one thing I said is, while I was in my elementary years and through high school, I actually really tried to fit in and did not want to stand out, and so did not share my culture with my fellow classmates. And only later did I come to realize that that is a true loss when we're talking about such a diverse country and how much we can benefit from learning about other cultures. But I just tried to fit in and be very white growing up. And it wasn't until college that I came more into my Palestinianness. And after college, I decided to move to Jerusalem to learn more about what was happening and see if I could make a difference, because I knew that I had opportunity in the United States because of the sacrifices that my parents made, opportunity that many Palestinians don't get. And I believe that with that opportunity comes responsibility. So what could I do? I moved to Jerusalem after college. Initially, it was to work for a conflict resolution program that brought kids together, Israeli and Palestinian kids. And I told the students this, that it's great to talk and to learn about one another. But one thing I learned in my time working for this organization is that it's not enough. It's not enough to just say that you have a friend from the other side. And what happens in a lot of these programs is that they make people feel good about having friends and talking, and it stifles any kind of action that needs to be taken in order to dismantle the structures that actually divide people and cause the violence. And I told the students that Palestinian and Israeli kids got to become best friends. But then when you take the kids home, to the Israelis home, to their towns and cities that are built on the ruins of Palestinian villages, and then you take the Palestinians home and they have to go through checkpoints under the guns of Israeli soldiers that could very well be the brothers or the sisters of their new Israeli best friend. And these kinds of things, these structures, and again, dismantling them, aren't addressed by these programs. And what happens even worse is that these programs come to be taken as an alternative for actually taking concrete action. So I left this program and I co-founded the International Solidarity Movement. This is what I shared with the students, that the International Solidarity Movement calls for people from all over the world, no matter what country, what political persuasion, what religion, what ethnicity, to come and stand with Palestinians in their liberation struggle. To stand with Palestinians not because they're anti-Israel or anti-Jewish. And in fact, and I stress this point, many, many people that came to work with the ISM were Jewish American, we had Jewish Israelis, Jewish Europeans, because I told the students, this and Palestinian oppression, it's not Palestinians versus Israelis or Jews versus Muslims and Christians. That's not the what's happening. What's happening is that you have a system of oppression, you have oppression and occupation, and you have what Palestinians are calling for freedom, equality, liberation. And if you stand with freedom, then you can come and stand with Palestinians. And that thousands of people came, and I had the privilege to work with them in confronting policies that harm Palestinian human rights. This is the generality that I spoke into to the students. I didn't go into very many detail. In one of the assemblies, in the very first one, I did go into a little bit more detail because I thought it important to talk about Rachel Corrie. It was 2 days before the 20th anniversary of her killing. So I briefly mentioned Gaza and what's happening in Gaza, and read one of Rachel's emails about her perspective from Gaza, and then let the students know that she was killed, and this, 2 days later would mark the 20th anniversary of her death. Now, the principal did pull me aside after the first assembly and told me that it might be a little bit too political. Some students were uncomfortable because many students and families have relations or ties to Israel. And I told the principals that that shouldn't matter. What's happening in Palestine is a war crime, is crimes against humanity. I was asked to speak about my perspective there, and these are my experiences. And he did say that he wanted the students to not shut me out, and therefore, if we could try to make it a little less political. So I didn't argue. I said, fine, I won't talk about Gaza. So in the second, third, and fourth assemblies, I didn't talk about Gaza or Rachel. The rest of the message stayed the same. And in all four assemblies, I left the students with a very, I felt, positive message, which was, no matter what's your background, don't let the forces that try to divide people based on our differences win. Always remember that every person deserves the same kind of freedom, equality, and dignity and rights that they want for themselves and that they deserve. And if these students keep that in mind and remember to be kind and conscientious every day in their homes, in their communities, and as they go out into the world, they will really help make this world a much kinder, gentler place. So it was an overall, just a few minutes about my experience. All that was said in under 7 minutes, with a final message that, to work together and to not let our differences cause any kind of hate and division, to work together to make sure that everyone has the same kind of rights and is able to live free and with dignity. And I thought it was well received for the most part. And I was very surprised. Like when you said within 24 hours, I was just bombarded with news about, a press release that was put out condemning the school for allowing me to talk to students and calling me anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and all of these lies that were perpetrated by people and organizations that weren't even at the top. And it spiraled from there. Following that, there was an emergency school board meeting where countless people got up to just make horrific actions.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about next, because you've experienced being attacked before for fact-based criticism of Israel's human rights abuses. And that's my next question. What was so unusual about how this attack unfolded?
Yes, that is true. In my years campaigning for Palestinian rights, you have, and I've been subjected to, these forces that are just avid Israel supporters, that are apologists for Israel, and they just denigrate, dehumanize, and attack Palestinians and anyone that tries to make a case for Palestinian rights. So I've been called everything. I'm used to that, but I'm used to it coming from, these radical voices. They will keep doing that. What shocked and disturbed me and a lot of others is the speed and the extent to which the school administration succumbed to the pressure to denounce me. So on the same day, like before the day was over, the principal, who in my interactions with him was very, very kind, very personable and we had good interactions. He put out an email apologizing to the community that one of the speakers, me, although he didn't personally name me, went off topic, is what he said. That I diverted from the topic that I agreed to speak upon, which wasn't true. And then he apologized or stated that they condemn any form of speech that attacks people based on their religion, insinuating that I said anything that could have been taken as hate speech or speech that attacked anybody. Even though he didn't name me, it was very obvious and it suggested something that just didn't happen. So that was disappointing. And the following day, because the same people that attacked me thought that his email, the principal's email, was not specific enough because it didn't name me, the superintendent put out a much longer email that then specifically said that I engaged in anti-Semitic rhetoric. Wow. And promising to and apologizing for not doing better, promising to vet future speakers and not allow mistakes like this to happen again. So the speed and the extent to which school administrators succumb to this hate and campaign of lies was alarming. And I was adamant that we couldn't let this pass. Fortunately, we have a number of people also that contacted me disturbed, including the Jewish Voice for Peace organization in Detroit, the Detroit branch, and wanted to do something about it also. So we worked together. They put out a very strong statement condemning the bigotry that came from those that were spreading lies and asserting, obviously, that talking about Palestinian human rights is not anti-Semitism.
Well, I mean, a question, how would one give the Palestinian perspective of living in extreme discrimination without mentioning the ongoing occupation and oppression Israel subjects them to? And of course, how that extends to the U.S. discourse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the campaign that was launched was specifically calculated to erase the Palestinian narrative, to silence Palestinians and anyone that would speak out about Palestinian rights, because what happened was all over the local media, and the way the media covered it was basically the way that the Zionists wanted it covered, insinuating that there was an anti-Semitic speaker and anti-Semitic comments made at a local high school that has enraged parents. That was the coverage. And then there were repercussions. There were demands that administrators be fired. The principal was put on administrative leave. And when anybody sees this kind of reaction to talk about basic Palestinian rights, at best, you don't want to touch the subject because it becomes too controversial. And that is exactly what these people want, to silence us and also to make it too costly for anybody else to try to give a platform for a Palestinian to speak about his or her experiences. That was the danger of it. As you said, I'm used to the attacks and the smears, but how quickly the school succumbed to the pressure and their promise to make sure that mistakes like this don't happen again, that means to make sure that Palestinians aren't allowed to speak about their experiences again. And when it comes down to it, I did not even go into very detail. I suggested that Palestinians are occupied and living under an oppressive system and are campaigning for their freedom, which is all obviously true and a mild description of what's happening.
This is what Rabbi Asher Lopenton from the Jewish Community Relations Council, which is basically the first organization to complain, and he said that he was upset and sad for the students that heard it and were hurt. Said he's a believer in Palestinian rights and wishes that there were a leader that could bring Jews and Muslims and Americans together instead of doing it in a divisive way. What do you say to this?
You know, it has become very popular for Israel apologists to say that they want Palestinian human rights too. Of course, you don't want to speak about it. You don't want to say that you oppose human rights, but when you won't let a Palestinian share their experiences, it's as if Palestinians can only talk about their rights in a way that is okay with the people who might get offended or uncomfortable by naming what Israel is doing. And that is unacceptable. You're policing Palestinian talk. Palestinians need to not only, accept their subjugation, but if they want to in any way overcome it, it has to be in a way that that satisfies or doesn't make Zionists uncomfortable. Well, you know what? People have to get uncomfortable, because the truth is that there are many people that are certainly comfortable with the status quo that discriminates against all kinds of people, whether we're talking about Palestine or whether we're talking right here in the United States. There are people that don't want to hear about civil rights, African-American rights, trans rights, all of these things. It makes them uncomfortable. But if we're going to, again, work towards a world where all people are treated equal and they have the same kind of freedom, dignity, and respect that we want for ourselves, then we have to sometimes get uncomfortable. I have no doubt that some of those students, unfortunately, the fact that I was wearing a keffiyeh, the fact that I identified as Palestinian, the fact that I used the word Palestine, that in and of itself made them uncomfortable because of the rhetoric and the perspectives that they are raised with, to believe that Palestinian rights affect is in a way counter to their own rights and their own existence. And that is unfortunate. That rhetoric, that indoctrination needs to be reversed. And so they need to hear not only what I said, but more of it.
Predictably, pro-Israel groups exerted maximum pressure on the school's superintendent, Pat Watson. Did you have an opportunity to present your side?
I didn't. Neither Mr. Watson nor the principal nor anyone reached out to me in the first few weeks. I did recently have a conversation with one of the school board members, and we just had an event that was organized by Jewish Voice for Peace that was meant to call out what was done and to point out how the school's response was unacceptable, and to state very loudly and clearly that speaking out for Palestinian rights is not anti-Semitic. It was a very well-attended event, nearly 150 people. Even some Zionists did attend. There was some disruption at first, but for the most part, strong presentations, including by a local rabbi, a wonderful discussion, and a request that we continue to do more like this. And so now we're talking with Jewish Voice for Peace and others about next steps so that we can continue this. And so there could be more talk about what's happening in Palestine and Palestinian rights, not less.
So, we should underscore again how quickly anti-Israel rhetoric became conflated with anti-Semitism. And Pat Watson, the school superintendent, issued, I was looking at the statement that what was issued, and he goes on, in a school of no place for hate, etc., anti-Semitic rhetoric was shared with our students, and we recognize its devastating impact. Now, what is being cited as anti-Semitic? I didn't say what did this, there's nothing about, they just throw that accusation at you and say anti-Semitic rhetoric, but what did he give any example of that anti-Semitic?
Nothing. And that was pointed out by, a number of people, that they said anti-Semitic rhetoric or, hate speech, but no one can point to anything that I said that would come even remotely close to either one.
There is a pattern here. I mean, we see this happening time and time again, and sadly, those who are involved, or I'd say caught in the middle, like the principal, who ended up writing an email condemning what happened, apologizing, etc. And then at the end of the day, despite this, they end up losing their job, right? So it doesn't even help. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into this, but there is a bright side to this, which is how the students articulately criticize the unfounded accusations being manufactured about your presentation. Talk about this.
Yes, there was a emergency school board meeting a few days after the assembly, and I didn't attend that, but it was live streamed, and a number of people who I know did attend, and they were just horrified because person after person was allowed to get up and attack me, even compare me to the KKK and other things. But a number of students spoke, including 3 of the female women of color organizers of the Diversity Assembly got up and made a very strong statement refuting the lies and as eloquent and strong as their statement was, what was disturbing is the media outlets that covered the school board meeting covered the perspective of the parents that were sharing the lies and the dismay and calling me an anti-Semitic speaker. None of the media outlets covered the perspectives of the students, of the organizers, or even of people that didn't agree with this hysteria. And that was unfortunate. That's certainly a criticism of the media. That's something that we have to work on. But the students have been strong in this. They have refused to apologize because it was demanded that they apologize for inviting me to speak. And they said that they will not apologize for giving a platform to a Palestinian voice or for allowing me to speak. And so they have come under a lot of criticism because an unfortunate consequence or aftermath of this hysteria that was caused is that there were a lot of threats against students in the school. So a lot of Arab and Muslim students reported being attacked, threatened, even death threats. And so the organizers have been bearing a heavy weight on them that this was the aftermath of what was supposed to be a very positive assembly to spread awareness of the of diversity and the dangers of discrimination, because these forces, apologists for Israel, and unfortunately ill-informed or bigoted parents also that were more interested in spreading lies, did what they did, just raised the level of hysteria. It implanted in their students that this is the way that they should behave, and proceeding with threatening Arab and Muslim students and just creating more divisiveness. And, you know, as you mentioned, there were disciplinary actions taken. So the principal was put on administrative leave and he has since resigned. And the superintendent, Pat Watson, also announced his early retirement, which was linked to this diversity assembly. And so what kind of message does that give to students? That this kind of hysteria and lies and attacks and the way that these organizations and parents acted yields results. They, in a sense, won by getting these administrators to lose their jobs, which was another reason why Jewish Voice for Peace and myself and others wanted to have a counter event, a community forum, to discuss this, the dangers of this, and how to act more appropriately and how to move forward in actually talking more, not less, about Palestinian rights, not letting these kinds of voices and these the hatred and lies win. And like I said, that we had a very positive reaction, and we hope to build on that more, because as you said, it happens a lot. It happens across the country almost on a daily basis that people are attacked. We're talking about Palestinian rights. People lose their jobs and face other consequences. In this instance, with this incident, I was attacked, subject of a smear campaign, but these kind of forces, they didn't affect my job or anything like that, but they did affect others' jobs, which is as as horrific, as unacceptable. And I hope that by what we're doing here to counter this, to raise our voices loudly and to not shy away, to not be quiet about it, can help raise awareness and provide support to other people who might be facing this across the country. I mentioned that Jewish Voice for Peace put out a strong statement. That statement was signed by 200 organizations nationally, including some big national organizations like the Center for Constitutional Rights, the National Lawyers Guild, the Poor People's Campaign, and many, many others, including some synagogues, Jewish Voice for Peace, a rabbinical council. It was also signed by dozens of rabbis and pastors and over 1,100 other community activists from around the country. So I think it's a strong testament to the fact that people are aware of this silencing tactic and oppose it, and we need to build on that.
I mean, I feel there is a sense of panic, and therefore they have doubled down on their attacks. As I'm sure you're aware of, the recent polls released that there is a major shift towards sentiments towards Palestinians, especially amongst young Americans in the Democratic Party. This is a Gallup poll that was just released a few weeks ago. And so they're doubling down on these attacks rather than trying to explain things. You ran as a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Congress in 2022. Do you think this played a role in the escalation of attacks against you to delegitimize you in further political candidacies?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to be sure. Some people in their attacks that I've seen posted online and other places mentioned that I was also a political candidate and used that in some way to attack me. Whether those people know it or not, in my district that I ran in, although I was not ultimately successful, we actually felt that my stance on Palestine did not harm me in my district. I was attacked a lot from the outside, but we conducted a poll in my district amongst primary voters, and the response to me and my stance on Palestinian human rights was very positive. In fact, nearly 70% of those polled said that my position on cutting aid to Israel based on its human rights abuses was a reason to vote for me, almost 70%. And therefore, going back to what you said, the public perception is shifting. And this does make apologists for Israel very nervous. And so they will try to pull out all the stops. Unfortunately, they still have a majority of our political representatives, but that just goes to show you that our political representatives don't always represent what the people want and what the people are saying. But we continue to do the grassroots work, and we continue to mobilize to elect people that do represent us, and we'll get there. I'm confident we will get there. What I always just think about is how many more people need to suffer and die until we actually get there and wake people up to what's happening.
Huwaida Arraf, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's the voice in the face of Huwaida Arraf, Palestinian-American activist who is being essentially attacked by the Hasbarista and the pro-Israel groups for doing the very thing that is constitutionally protected in this country, Jamal, speaking about her own experience as a Palestinian-American, growing up, talking about her family, her life, and being Palestinian. But as you said in the intro to this, the pro-Israel Hasbaristas are going crazy because she dares speak about the history of the Nakba. She dares speak about occupation, oppression, and the apartheid state. It seems like they're going a little crazy about the fact that people have the right to speak about these issues, Jamal.
Well, I mean, in our discussion, and I've mentioned that, I do sense a feeling of panic And I wouldn't say Hasbaristas, which is Hasbara propagandists in this country, but they're actually worse than this. In many instances, those organizations should be registered as foreign agents because they are an arm of AIPAC, basically trying to shut down any debate and muzzle down, criticism of Israel. And on top of this, conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. In her case, they started attacking the school, the superintendent and the principal for inviting her, and then they moved on to label her as an anti-Semite, which is a defamation without presenting any proof. They just throw that word to silence and scare off people, despite the need to learn about what's going on there. And as usual, and just to add to what happened, that attack on the principal, the attack on the superintendent, force a resignation, right? So they force an apology. It's not going to affect Huwaida Arraf's stature as a Palestinian-American.
No.
Because she's not making money out of all of this. That's not her job. But now a principal who had the idea to invite her now had to resign. And before resigning, had to write an apology letter. For what? It's a pattern here. And this is the message, is that when you succumb to these organizations, and I call them as hate groups, and apologize for nothing, they are never satisfied. They will never be satisfied.
But they get empowered. I mean, that's part of the problem now. They get empowered to do this. And when a constitutional right is so attacked like this, and people are being forced to resign for giving Huwaida or anybody the opportunity to speak about their experience, this is going to empower the hate groups. This is going to empower these pro-Israel groups who are on the attack. And I think your point is a good one, Jamal. We've talked about this. Because of their anxiety about losing the kind of justice analysis about what's happening in Palestine, they're losing. People see the apartheid state for what it is. Overwhelmingly Democrats, and it looks like the change in the demographics of this country, people are much more sympathetic and understand the oppressive practices of the apartheid state and support Palestinian rights for freedom and self-determination. So I think that's the right analysis now. They're anxious, they're scared, they see that they're losing, and so when they do that, when they're in this situation, they up the ante. And I think I've said this before on the show, I'm going to say it again, they're overplaying their hand, and it's gonna work against them. For sure.
Well, here is a simple litmus test before we move on, because that was a very interesting interview. Replace Huwaida Arraf by a Ukrainian-American and ask them to speak about their experience without mentioning Russia, without mentioning an occupation, without mentioning attacks on Kiev or any of these stories. You just talk about your experience as an immigrant in this country without talking about that. And I'll stop right here,
Okay, well, we should talk about, we'll come back to this because it's not going to stop. Jamal, Khader Adnan dying from a hunger strike in an Israeli prison, this is really devastating and catastrophic. I mean, he's an Palestinian activist leader. He's gone on multiple hunger strikes for over 20 years. He's been in and out of Israeli detention. He's been on a hunger strike for 86 days. And the Israeli prison authority let this man die. This is unacceptable.
Well, I mean, there is a story within a story within a story. Number one, Khader Adnan was never tried, was never charged.
Never.
Okay?
Never.
20
years.
So he's been in and out of Israeli, what they call it, detention or what have you, of course, prisons there, many times. And he has never been charged which, I read in the media some places like, okay, he's a, terrorist and what have you. He's a spokesperson to begin with, right? He's a spokesperson. He's not a military person. He's not militarized. And he was arrested. This is the last time on February 5th. And he refused, food, and refused, by the way, you mentioned he refused medical checks because he said, I don't belong there. This is like every time they just put him on administrative detention without a trial. And it took, basically, he's 45 years old, so he should be very, very, somebody in his prime, healthy. And it took 87 days, and finally he succumbed and died. And before that, he even went on a hunger strike for a longer period of time. And then they release him, and then they bring him back. Again, no trial, no charges there,
Right.
And the apartheid states they can arrest you. They don't have to provide any evidence. They put it under secret evidence, and that's what they do with every single Palestinian. So you don't have to even know what basically their charges. And that's his story. His story, in a nutshell, they let him die, and rather than basically admitting that his arrest was basically false, basically.
Well, that's right, Jamal. And I think, the couple of important points which you spoke about, which need to be emphasized. Never been charged. He's been arrested on and off for 20 years, gets arrested, goes to prison, and they eventually release him. So he's basically the forever kind of Palestinian prisoner, along with thousands of other Palestinians who languish in Israeli prisons or military prisons without charges. So this goes against every international law that we know of. If you're going to arrest somebody, you're obligated to charge them. They've never charged them. On the issue of letting him die, even if you refuse medical attention, Jamal, the international medical standard is you don't let somebody die. You could still give them treatment so that they don't die.
Basically, he didn't want medical attention by Israel. So they could have for example,
Absolutely.
taking him to Al-Maqasid Hospital or gotten the Red Cross involved. I should make a correction here. This is actually his longest hunger strike. This is in 2012 he ended his which was what brought attention to him, international attention for a 66-day hunger strike that ended in February 2012, which was at the time the longest known hunger strike by a Palestinian detainee in Israeli prison. So this time, look, he went on even further than this. And he's been arrested 11 times since 2004. And so if you add the total period of time he spent in Israeli jail, 8 years. 3 years without any charges, without any trial.
So you know what I call this, Jamal? Extrajudicial murder of a Palestinian civilian. It's an extrajudicial murder. Never been charged, put in prison, and then left to die when he should have been given every attention through the ICRC and not allowed to die. So I consider this kind of an extrajudicial murder of a Palestinian civilian. So, the situation, this segues into our next segment, right, Jamal? When the international community, and by the way, what's interesting about this, his murder, his death, Khadr Adnan's death, made the Washington Post, it made the New York Times. So we see cracks in the kind of ability of the mainstream media to avoid, calling the apartheid regime, the Israeli regime, out on these charges. So the fact that his murder, his death, made some aspects of the mainstream media, I think, is kind of telling at this time. But at a time when the rest of the world is condemning the apartheid state, and Joe Biden, in fact, is refusing to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu, we have a Trump lapdog, Kevin McCarthy, going to Tel Aviv, going to the apartheid state and visiting with a pariah, with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, my question is, before we talk about that, is he a lapdog? I mean, or did he remain as one, or is he running for president?
Good question. I don't know if he's going to run for president. I think he's still a lapdog. I don't think he's going to run right now. He likes being the president. He likes being the Speaker of the House. He is a lapdog. This is what I said to a number of people. Happy birthday to the apartheid state. The apartheid state turned 75. They're celebrating 75 years of occupation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. When the rest of the world is shunning this, you have a Kevin McCarthy going and celebrating this apartheid state. And he gets away with it. Obviously, no other politician around the world, except, we'll talk about the EU, the head of the EU, who made an outrageous comment maybe in a bit. But Kevin McCarthy also did something which Joe Biden is refusing to do. Kevin McCarthy said he'll invite Benjamin Netanyahu to speak in front of the House of Representatives if Joe Biden doesn't invite him to the White House.
I mean, the simple thing, this is not just the United States. He is not a member of the Biden administration.
He's not.
His party does not control the White House. He does not have the authority to signal the the United States diplomatic posture. I mean, so if we just in simple terms, he's overstepping his authority. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Right, but can I remind you of something? When Obama was president and had a cool relation to Netanyahu, Netanyahu gave that outrageous speech to the House of Representatives. I believe that was 2009, 2010 at some point. So, this is a classic example of bowing over to pro-Israeli pressure. The House of Representatives does not control the foreign policy, does not dictate foreign policy. That's the executive branch and through the State Department, and it is not the official U.S. policy at this point to invite Benjamin Netanyahu to the United States. So, he's a lapdog, for sure.
He's having a love fest with Benjamin Netanyahu, shunned by almost most world leaders. The worst and the most racist government in probably in modern history. And now he is basically having a love fest with him. He's inviting him to come to the U.S., and he got invited by Benjamin Netanyahu to address the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and he's, by the way, second person to do that as far as a House Speaker. The other one is your favorite Newt Gingrich. So another darling for Israel.
Well, but let's be clear. He has the calculation, Kevin McCarthy, that this is going to serve him. They're looking at wedge issues. They believe that, and it's mind-boggling to say this, but I'll say it, but Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans believe that Joe Biden and the Democrats are not pro-Israel enough. So they're kind of doing this in a way because they think it's going to shore up their support in the next election. It's outrageous. I think it's going to backfire, but I think that's part of his crazy calculation.
Well, I still feel that he might just throw his hat in the ring.
I don't think so. He's loving being speaker, and he loves being the lapdog. I don't think we can end this show without the kind of head of the European Union offering her birthday wishes to the apartheid state. It was outrageous what she said. She said something to the effect, "Happy birthday," and the apartheid state, they made the desert bloom. The classic kind of colonial rejectionist of reality statement. It was a complete denial of apartheid and complete denial of the reality there. So I guess Kevin McCarthy has other company right now.
Well, this is basically someone, when you're talking about basically the EU leader, the foreign minister, is that? No, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
the foreign minister.
Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes. Yeah.
Using basically a racist trope in speech making Israel's statehood anniversary. And it looks like she's like 75 years behind history and reality, when Israelis themselves don't believe this nonsense that was created by early Zionists and by the likes of Golda Meir and others.
Hey, all I got to say is happy birthday, apartheid. If you're celebrating 75 years of oppression, occupation, ethnic cleansing, and land theft, happy birthday, apartheid. Unbelievable.
Well, on this note, you've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we will talk to you next week.
See you next week.